Hello, my name is Jim. Welcome to Politics and Plastic. How's it going? Sam, how's it going? Neil?
It's going great. How's it going with you, Jim?
I'm very good. Yeah, so today I'm joined by Sam. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Sam, so I'm not going to attempt to. Can you for the audience?
That's yeah. If,
Gee.
if you're from Scotland, you pronounce it Jukit, but you can
Okay.
pronounce it pretty much any way you like. Most people say do good.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
So
I'll
Neil
take
is and Neil, I also don't want to get this wrong. You're one of the head judges of the World Team Championship, formerly known as the ETC. Is that correct?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
We have no head judges. We
Yeah.
have no head judges there, but I'm the unofficial titular head judge.
Right. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been
Involved in that kind
leading the ref. Been leading the ref crew at the ETC since 2014.
Okay, so you've seen a lot over
I-
over the years. It would be accurate to say you've seen a lot of shit.
I've still a lot of shit. I mean, prior to that, I was the Scottish captain. I've been going to the ETC since 2008, and I've been playing competitive 40k since second ed and TOing since fourth ed. So I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of shit.
Yeah, and I didn't get a chance to say, but congratulations. I know you're at home taking care of a new baby, so congratulations on that. It's always exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We 10 month old. Turned 10 months on Sunday, so it's good. Thankfully, living in Sweden, we get proper social care. So I have 180 days fully paid parental leave to take in the first 4 years.
That's amazing. I don't even think we have that in Canada, and we like to think ourselves as pretty progressive, but I think Sweden has this beat. And Sam,
The Nordics.
And Sam, maybe tell me a little bit about your background. So I know you write for FLG, and that's kind of how I kind of came to know you through some of the articles that you wrote. And specifically, you wrote a few articles in the last few weeks that I thought were quite salient to what we're going to discuss today. And so I decided to add you to the show. But maybe give me a little bit about your background, kind of like whatever you think might be relevant to this discussion, or not necessarily qualifications, because I don't think really any of us have qualifications outside of that. We're hobbyists and we like Warhammer, but yeah. So maybe just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. Like I said, I've been running for FLG for a little over a year now. I've been playing 40K for about, I think, 15 years or so. Yeah, so how I started writing with FLG and kind of started to go more into the community is I spent a year trying to focus on being the #1 overall Eldar Corsair player.
Nice.
Back at the waning days of 8th edition with my 16 Venoms. It was just really, it got to know some more people in the community, kind of go to some major events, and just piqued my interest even further. And I've just really enjoyed the opportunity to write. I think there are a lot of aspects about the game of Warhammer, both Age of Sigmar and 40K, that really interest me, as well as the community and just the various issues that it has to deal with these days.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the goals of this show, is to have those kinds of discussions that maybe are not fully game related, but they're kind of adjacent to the game, and kind of bigger issues that the community has to deal with. And then just a few housekeeping notes before we do get in. There was obviously, and I did post this on my social media, but I know Neil for sure, and me as well, have had a little bit of, I don't want to say pushback, but we've had some people reach out to us, maybe making sure that we're not trying to I guess fan any flames. This conversation was actually scheduled for about 3.5 weeks. We had scheduled this show right around after the Clutch City tournament, and this is actually episode 3. So it would have been probably around 3.5 weeks ago, when I think, or almost a month ago, when Clutch City happened. And that whole discussion we had, and I would really encourage you guys, because obviously I'm going to shamelessly plug my own show, to go back and watch that. And I did make a lot of points in that episode when we were discussing the issues, the kind of happenings around Clutch City, as to what should happen. And some of those I'm gonna revisit today, because I actually went back and watched that video, and a lot of them felt like almost kind of like I was predicting the future, because it felt like it was, I kind of went over all these kind of points and various things, and then like literally 3.5 weeks later, we had an incident obviously in the community that came true. So that's kind of the first point. The second point is, today's discussion is going to really be centered around the broader topic of what do we do after the fact. So there's been, right now there's been a million hot takes regarding specific incidents that have happened over the last few weeks. We're not going to really get into the specifics of any incident or specific people. We're not here to attack anyone's character. We're not here to talk about any specific person. What we want to talk about, though, is what are the broader community implications of events like this, and what do we need to do to move forward as a community. And I think it's a topic that I think is very, very polarizing. I did post in Reddit actually this afternoon, and I had everything from lifetime bans to floggings to people, like the level of to people saying, oh, whatever, it's just a game. So the level of like polarization within the community when it comes to an issue like this seems to be massive. There's a massive, massive gap. And so that inherently means that there's some problems. There's going to be some problems. And one of the big things about this show, guys, is that we might not always come to an answer. So as much as we'd like to get into the nitty gritty, there's going to be often topics that are just too complex, too controversial, too difficult to have an answer. And our goal, and especially talking to Neil and Sam, is let's kind of, see if we can scratch the surface, see if we can make some progress on the discussion, and hopefully maybe even just bring down the temperature a little bit, because there have been a lot of very malicious, mean things that I've seen in the last, I'd say 2 weeks regarding the specific incident that happened. I want to make it very clear that any sort of personal threats, death threats, anything like that is completely unacceptable. I do not condone any sort of like things of physical violence, guys. At the end of the day, this is just a game. We're all here to have fun. But with that said, we want to have a fair playing field. And I really want to make sure that everyone kind of goes into this with cool heads. And so that is, I guess, just to preface the conversation. And then just one other small announcement before we get into the main discussion. Tomorrow, I'll be doing another cast called a competitive episode with Winter's SEO at noon Pacific as well. So that's going to be the pilot episode of that show. So if you guys are interested in a little bit more competitive content from this channel, it's mostly just me just running my mouth currently and talking about whatever the hell I want. But tomorrow's premiere at 12 o'clock of Competitive Corner is going to be a little bit more competitive focused, even though, to be fair, I'm not very good at Warhammer. So tune in at your own peril and take my advice at your own peril. So with that said, let's get into the discussion. And I guess I just wanted to, I don't know, do you guys have any extra thoughts to add to kind of that intro? Is there anything you want to kind of say as far as the kind of, I don't want to say ground rules because there are no rules. You guys, we can say whatever we want, but as far as just framing the conversation around those kinds of like ideals?
Yeah. So one of the things I think that's very important when we think about the redemption is that it's not just people who have cheated who kind of need redemption. You can play the game by the rules and be a really toxic person and still kind of, a lot of these things that we can discuss are probably going to be salient to that same topic. And it's something that I have to confess, it's something I have some experience with. A couple of years ago when I first started to get into the competitive scene, this was at the end of 6th edition into the 7th, I was actually a very, very toxic person to play. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. I could give you an excuse. I could tell you, well, I didn't have much money, so I thought of all my tournaments as investments. So if I'm going in there, I need to get my money's worth. So like I'd be willing to sort of almost everything up to cutthroats to get that win. And it was bad. It killed the local tournament scene and even the local community I was a part of just in my play. So it's stuff I've thought about, not just only in the sense of, this is what somebody else needs to do. This is, these are the changes I want to see in somebody else. These are things that I usually will have to ask myself, and that I can find myself being tempted to be either sort of toxic, or even sometimes I've never cheated at any of these events. I can understand that pressure of people. Yeah, my lawyer has told me this. I've never been caught cheating. So I think those are there's a broader application to some of the stuff that we can talk about here than just some of the incidents that we've run into these past couple of days.
Right. Yeah, I think it's also worth bringing to conversation about, like you say, the community, because at the end of the day, the reactions that some people have are, they're completely unrealistic. They're completely beyond what they should be. At the end of the day, did this person doing this thing directly affect you? Odds on, no. The rabid, I'm going to say insanity. It is insanity to some people. It's absolute idiocy and insanity to some people, right? It just the community just needs to bring it down a tone and just breathe and let the people that were involved, were affected, deal with it, rather than everybody jumping on each other's backs. I mean, give an example. The last ETC, there's a guy caught for loaded dice. you know. And this is a guy from an Eastern European country. So quite literally, 99% of anyone on Facebook in the competitive 40k community is never, ever, ever going to come into contact with this guy. Still, despite that, I got so many messages, and very angry messages, about why I wasn't naming and shaming this person and hanging this person's name out to dry. And it's like, it was a case of, but it's not got anything to do with you, so why would I? You know, everyone just needs to breathe a bit, because as we all know, the internet, things escalate very quickly on the internet. And the example given of what's happened this week, where, you know, death threats posted on Reddit, you know, whether they're serious or not, you've got to take them seriously. And it's just, and it does just beyond the pale, you know. There's absolutely, this is man dollies, this is plastic Barbies we're playing with, boys and girls. It is not life or death, and I think people just need to breathe and remember that.
And to kind of just to reiterate that, like, you know, the prize or the reward is so insignificant. Like, you know, I don't want to say I could see it or justify it, but, you know, if we were playing in like the Dota 2 tournament for $2 million and people were caught cheating, okay, I could maybe see a little bit more like heat. We're literally playing for nothing. Like, people, you know, the prize for the ITC, I guess, in a lot of ways, or any of these events, people, and you mentioned something, Sam, about making your money back earlier. People always used to say to me, they're like, oh, like, it must be nice, like, going to all these events and like winning all this stuff. I'm like, but like, I don't make my money back because I'm traveling. I live in Vancouver, so that means every tournament is a 3 or 4 hours away, or flying. Like, if I wanted to make money and have more product, I would just stay home, because I'd actually I'd save that money and I'd just buy models with it. Because all in all, I'll end up with way more stuff if I just don't go to events. And so the idea that like there is some sort of like reward here in the end, like the amount of time and effort and energy you'd have to put in to actually, quote unquote, make your money back, is just, it's like, it's totally backwards. So like, we're not playing for anything of any, besides just like some bragging rights, maybe we're not playing for anything that's like really like material, I guess, at this point. Like, even the $4,000, like, I spent that in Vegas when I went to the LVO. Like, they would have covered my trip just barely, maybe. Like, my gambling was you know, like, maybe, like, even if you win the whole ITC. So it's like, that whole idea that like, we're not playing for much, guys, we're just playing for fun ultimately, and just some bragging rights. So you really got to just put that into perspective when we talk about what are people actually mad, what are actually people losing, right? What are they losing out on? You know, if I lost $2 million, I'd be a lot more mad than if I lost $150 box set. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, I think that's very cogent.
All right, so I guess I wanted to get into kind of the deep end a little bit here. So, and I do want to kind of differentiate a few different things that happen in our community. And I talked about this in the last podcast, so I'm just going to kind of pull it back. So, you know, I think in general, when we think about cheating, we always think of intent. And that's something that I've heard in some of the recent podcasts, is like, was there intent? And obviously, Neil, in that example from the WTC or the ETC, someone going, it's not only intent, it's premeditated. They went, they got loaded dice, right? And they
this one maybe not, because he had one die,
Sure.
and it's like there was a question. His argument was it was his lucky die,
Okay.
and he didn't use it. But the fact that you got it, and the fact that some players have said, yeah, whenever he needed to roll a 6, he rolled a 6. It's like
Oh, my YouTube just died again.
So I'm doing that.
How's that? I think we're good. Okay. All right. We're gonna just keep going. Okay. Anyways, yeah. So don't watch on YouTube then. All right. So anyways, so I do want to kind of separate out this idea of intent, and why I want to kind of actually remove it from the conversation is because I think in a lot of situations outside of, you know, what you described, you know, with maybe like a loaded dice or anything like that, intent is incredibly hard to measure. And obviously, in certain incidences, even when it seems like intent is clear, it's not perfect, right? So we can never know the true heart of someone. You know, like when we see someone cheat or do something that is dishonest, you don't ever know, like, did they mishear? Did they misread? Did they whatever? And so one of the things that I've advocated for is that intent actually is irrelevant to the subject, and that the punishment and or outcomes of like things happening, so mistakes, should be uniform, regardless of intent. And I always use things like sports for an example. Now, obviously, I don't know how closely you follow soccer in the UK. I know the soccer world is
Been
blowing up
following
right
it a lot
now, but
recently.
I know in a sport like hockey, like people get slashed, and sometimes they do it on purpose and it's like very intentional, and sometimes you turn around and you high stick someone and it's not intentional. It's just like, and either way you get a penalty. The ref doesn't ask you whether you meant to do it or not. So there is a punishment associated with an act regardless of intent, and it's something that I think we often don't, we TOs and players often try to kind of justify, and they say, okay, well, I didn't mean to do that, or and I was using that example from Sean Naden. Now, that specific example wasn't a good one because of the fact that there was typos involved. But I think honestly, like, if say there wasn't typos involved, and he just literally misread it, or someone just misread a points and had an illegal list by accident, right? It shouldn't matter that he didn't mean to do that, right? Like, we should treat that the same regardless. Now, maybe for that specific event, and I mean in a small scale. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be banned for life because he wrote an illegal list. But for that specific event, the immediate kind of, I guess, acute punishment should be like disqualification of the event or removal of the wins or whatever like that. So do you guys think that, I guess, the intent should play a role in this conversation? Because I understand, and I really mean from a, I don't want to talk about a punishments perspective, but I just mean like when we think about redemption, obviously intent is important, because if someone really didn't mean to cheat but they did accidentally, then it's a lot easier to accept them back than if someone said like, no, I meant to cheat and I got caught. So what is your guys' thoughts around intent?
See, I'm going to push back on your point there of like hockey and everyone should treat the same, and say I don't believe everyone should treat it the same. I mean, I'll give the example of rugby. In rugby, you have free kicks, you have
Yeah.
penalties. Penalties you can actually score points from directly, and penalties are when you deliberately, break the rules in a very deliberate manner, or you do something very dangerous. Whereas, like a professional foul would give away a penalty automatically. Everyone understands the concept of professional foul. Whereas if you make an error, it's a free kick, and a free kick can't directly convert to points. And I think that's the thing, because a good example, a very old example, a very good example was my mate Joachim Engström from the Swedish WTC guys. He used to go to Depticon all the time, and this is back in fifth ed. He wanted to take Grey Knights there, and like a week for a Depticon, I'm playing him, and I said, oh, look at his list, like, well, if you tweaked it this and did this, then you'd actually get these things that work out better. And he's like, oh, that's great, yeah, we'll do that. And he went to Depticon, he got to the final 8, and after the fact, he found out, oh, you're actually like 3 points over the list.
Hmm.
The list is therefore illegal. Does he get booted, or is it just a case of, the simple fact was I added up in my head and I added up wrong, and he just believed me, he didn't check it himself. Is there malicious intent there? There isn't. It's a silly mistake. It's a mistake. Should that be treated in the same way as, quote unquote, in WTC in Athens in Greece 4 years ago, catching a guy with a ton of loaded dice,
Right.
deliberately using loaded dice in game, and unquestionably he was using loaded dice during the games.
But I guess
they're not
Right.
the same things. I think there needs to be some kind of like application of common sense to the
Right.
situation.
I guess
And yeah, it is hard to say like intent. You can't read somebody's mind. You don't know if the intent's there. But I mean, I've done this for so many years that when you confront people, you generally can tell very quickly if they realized they were cheating or they didn't realize they're cheating. Just their body language screams it
right.
most of the time.
I guess, Neil, where I would push back is, let's say, so those two examples that you use are very different circumstances. One is regarding loaded dice and one is regarding a list error. But what if I accidentally spent an extra 5 points on my list, right? So if you had two players, one that were both over those 5 points, those 3 points, and they both could you honestly tell whether they did it accidentally or not? Like, or like, you know, they're both saying the same thing. Hey, it was an accident. I guess what my point is that the remedy or the punishment for that specific small list error should be something, and obviously in the loaded dice it should be something else. But if both those players created that error, we're not going to say, well, one didn't mean to do it, but we think the other guy did mean to do it, because we're judging whether one intended or not. And that's so when the act is the same, and we can't, unless there's like a you know, there's literally a paper trail. He sent an email saying, hey guys, I'm gonna, like, you know, put my list 5 points over and pretend that like it's not, and then just hope no one catches it. Like, I could see a situation like that. But when the crime is the same, right, should that intention, can you honestly say that every time someone has come in with an illegal list, you've been able to, or we can as a community, or whichever, not just you, and don't get me wrong, Neil, you're probably one of the most practiced judges in all of the circuit. So like, it's probably a lot, you probably have that like sixth sense a lot better than, you know, Joe Blow in you know, Minnesota, who's running his first event. Is he going to be able to read the player and know whether it was intentional, you know?
No. I think maybe we misunderstood you. I thought when you were talking earlier, you were talking about like, everything should be treated like this, regardless of what you do. This is the punishment. So I don't believe that. Every, you know, and you know, and it's a case of looking at, you know, what is the degree that they've done? What have they done? To what degree? And to what degree would that affect the game? And from that, you can generally sort of like come out with, you know, this is intentional or not. I mean, these days list errors generally are not that common because people use stuff like battle scribe and that. But if they happen, they do happen, and it's a case of, you know, I gave the example off air of the last tournament I ran back in September before we went into like full lockdown in Sweden, where it turned out that just before the final round, it turned out that the guys playing for first and second place basically had been playing the wrong list during the tournament. One of them was basically they both used Battle Scribe, and one of them had clicked the wrong psychic power on Battle Scribe, and but he was using another psychic power all tournament long. He didn't change it, didn't switch it. He clicked something instead of warp time. It was basically that was the case. Whereas, and the other guy had clicked, I don't know, Pelt of something instead of Belt of Rust. But again, he consistently played the relic that he thought he had on his list. And it's like, these are list errors. They played it all, but they played the error all through the tournament. And it's a case of like talking to the opponents and just say this is what's happened. And the unanimous thing was, it wasn't like the tournament, the people in the tournament. This is basically over half of WTC, to each WTC with that. Tells them, well, if they've been playing it the same way all tournament, and what they're playing isn't in itself illegal, it's just the list. It just doesn't correlate to what they've written in the list. It's not really the end of the world. And it's a judgment call. It's really hard. I think I actually had this conversation today with Rob, who's obviously Val, Pete, and Rob had the adjacent show today. And they were talking a little bit about
Wait,
this.
they were talking about actual 40K on the show?
They were talking about 40K actually. They were going really deep into it. And they were going really deep into a comparison of like the ITC judging rules versus the WTC judging rules. The ITC is really like, this happens and that's the consequence. There's no leeway, there's no grey area. And the reason that's written is because, like you said, you know, you've got Joe Bloggs who's running his first ever tournament in the middle of nowhere. He's probably got no experience of dealing with this. Whereas, you know, and whereas the WTC, and this is unfortunately a bit of a bias for me because I've been doing this for so many years, and the guys that work with me, the referees WTC, been doing it for so many years, is that we generally have a better feel on things. Also, the WTC players are all, you know, the very best of the best of their countries. They're not Joe Block going to an RTT. So it's also within the kind of gradation of the penalty. I think also needs to be, but it needs to be a consideration to the type of player that's making a mistake. Because if it's a guy's first tournament, he's for argument's sake, he shows up with a wrong list. I would weigh in that maybe it's just a genuine error because it's his first time rolling. If it is somebody who's a veteran player who's playing lots of tournaments all the time, and he rocks up for the legal list, well, this guy knows how to write a list. And he should know how to write a list. If he isn't writing a correct list, I'm going to lean on him much more heavily. And that may not seem fair to people, but that's basically. But again, I take it from sort of a refereeing background, because I have a background in rugby refereeing. I know, and the rugby as a qualified referee rugby, there is the rules of rugby, and a lot of it is also the referee's discretion of how those rules need to be applied to the situation, because you want to make sure in rugby it's about keeping the game flowing as much as penalising things. And in 4K, I think it's a case of like, you know, reprimanding Dave on his first tournament for doing something and slapping him for a yellow card on his first ever tournament, is that going to achieve? What's that going to achieve? Whereas equally the same error by Jim, who is ranked number 3 in the UK and played at 40 tournaments this year, get punished more because he should know better.
And I want to bring Sam in here. So Sam, what are your thoughts on this?
I was gonna chime in because on the one hand, with almost any type of refereeing, there's always going to be a certain element of judgment in it.
Yeah.
And Neil, I was actually going to reference the rugby too, because I think it's a perfect example. My dad was a rugby ref for a long time, more casually on the side, but I think that's a good example, one where you have the refs sort of actively engaging with the captains and saying, like, I've seen you guys doing this, stop doing that, or something along those lines. But I think it also sort of that judgment factor also kind of adds to the stickiness of it, because I think as a general, 40K players know how complex the game is. They know that there's been a time that they can think of, probably multiple times, that they've screwed up the rules, and you have this sort of idea like, well, I know I screwed up then, and I didn't want somebody sort of immediately jumping down my throat, so I'm not gonna make a big deal out of it, and such. And so that I think that brings a big issue, sort of. Why I think some people have some hesitancy with calling out behavior that's towing the line or even going over the line a little bit, and I think, I mean, you had issues with cheating a bit beforehand, but really the shifting to changes the perspective and the nature of the game as a whole, because before you might have somebody say, like, as I think about that game I had with player X, something just wasn't right. I don't have his codex, so I can't say it. But now with streaming, you have the ability to really scrutinize every action. I mean, and you'll see this too. Like I followed the NFL and a bunch of other sports. If there was, say, a football, it's 3 seconds before the end of the game, somebody throws a touchdown, but there was a false start and somebody started moving ahead of time that was never called. People get outraged about that. They throw a fit. Sometimes even professional referees will make just a profoundly bad judgment call.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and I think sort of trying to walk that line is just going to be really interesting going forward. I think there have been a lot of progress made in terms of codifying professional behavior, but I think we might be closing in on the spot where we start like some of the more types of violations, because I would say there's even a difference between having something marked wrong on your list versus being a couple points over. In terms of there's a bunch of different grades and violations, and it might be worth starting to think about how can we start to codify these,
right? So
and define.
I guess I don't want to spend too long on like punishments specifically, because I definitely want to get into the actual redemption part. But why I'm actually trying to split this topic a little bit is because obviously, and just to 2 points that you both made. So first was the comparison to rugby. I think that's great, but rugby has a very strict set of rules with like outcomes and remedies for each specific violation. So 40K does not. So we're living a little bit in the wild, wild west. And I know something that I've often heard and is this idea of like a governing body, a group of people that maybe would, and in the past, I would say the ITC played that role a lot, but, and they do within their own ecosystem a little bit, but they're very much a libertarian style of organization where they're very hands off. They want the TOs to do whatever they want. And even said, if you look at the rulings within the recent rulings, they said, look, this is our thing for the ITC charts, but at the end of the day, TOs can do whatever they want. And obviously the specific circuits have each made their own individual rulings within their circuits. So there's a huge amount of variation in outcomes. So that's the first thing. And so I do think that what this, and again, just to plug myself, what this calls on is this idea of a governing body, and I use body very loosely. Like it's not going to be like a council of 13 people, but we already have some of these organizations, the bones of some of these, like between the judges groups in the ITC, the WTC. Like these are kind of I'd say the two big kind of entities in competitive 40K would be the WTC on one hand, and then like the ITC judges group. Those are kind of like the two biggest, as far as I know. Maybe there's a third group in my, I got joked about the African 40K League, so maybe there's like a third group in the African 40K League in the Congo somewhere that we don't know about. But these are kind of the two big groups. And I think that a lot of competitive players, especially like where it matters, would probably be pretty open to some sort of like more descriptive and codified code of conduct, because we already have a code of conduct for the ITC. I'm not sure, and I know the WTC has a really high sense of, like, for me, the thing I love about the WTC is it's like it's built into the tournament is the fact that it is like such a high level of conduct is expected. Like you're going to represent your country. It's like going to the Olympics, right? Like it's you're representing your country. So there's this like inherent built-in and obviously as Neil was telling us, it still doesn't matter sometimes. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is um just like you guys mentioned, there are degrees of crime. So if I hit someone with my car, right, it might be manslaughter. But if I purposely run over someone with my car, it's maybe first degree murder or second degree murder. So even within the criminal system, we have degrees. Even if the crime and the outcome is the same, right? I hit someone with my car and I killed someone. The actual punishment might depend on the intent, right? So the mens rea. So was there criminal intent? And I guess my
Yeah.
point that I'm trying to kind of parse out of this, and I don't know if it's possible, it might be something that we just never understand, is when it comes to rehabilitating players, which is what we're going to get into, should we be looking at like should the pathway be different or the punishment be different based on either obvious intent, in which case sometimes it is very obvious someone cheated, but I know I've made mistakes in tournaments, and I'm sure every like, and I've played it very high. I feel like I hold myself to a very high standard. I made a pretty dumb error in the Greek Hammer event a few rounds back, and I literally had to go to my opponent and say, hey, I basically cheated on my secondaries. I shouldn't have gotten that secondary, and then the points were taken away, and I was, I tried to be honest with it and open with it because I discovered it personally. But like, had I not discovered that myself and someone else had, right, and said, oh, Jim is trying to get secondaries when he shouldn't have, all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, now Jim's a cheater because he like, and I was able to kind of get ahead of that because I went and I like fessed up essentially. So it's pretty obvious that I wasn't trying to cheat, but at the end of the day, like I think there's just a lot of instances where the intent part becomes so hard to figure out. I'd say the majority of cases, the intent isn't clear, and that's kind of where I think, when it's clear, it's clear, but it's usually not clear, and to the point of like the whole streaming thing. Like, look, LVO had 5,000 players like a few years ago. Of those, six games were streamed. So like 5,000 games, and 6 of them are streamed, right? Like it's like 8 out of 1,000 are streamed. So people that think that cheating hasn't been happening, there since Warhammer was invented, people have been cheating at it. It's just only now in the last like 2-3 years, and even I have stream games that I played on where cheating happened because 2-3 years ago people were streaming with like 720p webcams where there's no mics, and it was like hanging from the light. So, and I have games where I could show people, hey, this guy was cheating on stream, but like you can't. It looks like it was filmed with a potato. So this idea that like it's a new phenomenon, I don't think it's new. Obviously, I think the competitive circuit's got a lot more competitive, but I'd also argue that the ETC has been playing at that level, super high level for its entirety. So do you guys think that it's even worth trying to, every time there's like, say, something committed, like should we try to figure out how do we separate those things? Because why I come up to that point of like, hey, you committed X penalty or you committed X crime. We don't, because we'll never know your intent unless you literally, like, as I said, you literally have like a smoking gun email that says, hey, I'm gonna go cheat on the top table, right? Like there, even in the case, like even in recent cases, if you give someone, like, I've played events, 6-round tournaments where every game is hard, you're exhausted, maybe you went drinking the night before, and usually with me is the case. There's times where like I literally just have brain malfunctions. I stare at the models, I roll, something happens, and it's like you're like, oh yeah, that's not right. Like what I just did was like your brain just like malfunctions. Like it's just you're tired and whatever. And so those kinds of mistakes happen too. And I would, if someone discovered that, right? So if I said I rolled a 5 and I actually rolled a 4, I wouldn't want someone to say, well, it was an accident, Jim was tired. I'd want that punishment to be the same. I'd want them to say, like, no, like, if you make a mistake like that, there's a very discrete punishment for it and penalty. I guess that's, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it makes sense. Sorry.
go ahead, Neil.
I was going to say, just winding back, you're touching on the topic of there needs to be an there needs to be some kind of overriding body or some organization that does this. I mean, the simple answer is GW needs to pull the thing out a ridiculous amount of money off this game, and they should, and it's an amazing game. It's a great game and it's amazing models. Don't get me wrong, but they need to step up their responsibility as well, especially with employing, for example, Mike Brandt wants to get more heavily involved in the competitive scene. They need to step up their responsibilities there. I mean, I know that Adam Solis, who's obviously one of the LVO head judges, tried 2 years ago to an initiative to actually create some kind of codification for referees, and actually some way to actually train and qualify and certify people as referees. And I was involved sort of lightly in that as well. I was also involved when the ITC Code of Conduct came out as well. But the problem with that was it's a simple case of money.
Yeah.
If you're gonna have like people like Adam and John or these kind of guys, or like myself or Piotr and you're traveling around, where's the money to cover that and the time? And that's the issue there. There are, like I said, go back to the rugby thing. I'm qualified I'm a level 3 World Rugby referee, so I'm one step below full international status. But the guys who train me to get to this level, these guys have it as a full-time job to go around Europe and train referees, and that is their job. There isn't the funds beyond GW putting the money in. Don't think there'll ever, unfortunately, be the funds for the community to do that. And again, there'll always be that pushback as well. I mean, it's getting better. Like historically, there's always been a huge amount of pushback in America against the ETC, the WTC, and in Europe, historically, there's always been a big pushback against the ITC. It's getting better.
Way better.
There's less pushback.
It's been great. That change has been insane, by the way. The attitude change.
But I think you'll always have that. There will be people that will stick their necks out and say, it isn't GW, it isn't official. And I think that the only way to resolve this properly is to, Wizard of the Coast, Fantasy Flight, they have trained referees, they have a pro circuit, pro players, and they have top quality referees managing all their events, and a trickle down system where these referees also go and are community leaders and teach people from the community to referee the smaller events. And the only people who lead that is GW, but I just don't unfortunately ever see GW doing that.
Right. And I was gonna say, like, the chances of that happening are maybe 0.01%, and anytime I think like even Mike Brandt, who's the closest thing we're ever going to get to have someone that like knows the like competitive scene and kind of knows all that desire for that, who's literally like and he's like right there just touching, like he's, even him with all his like clout would never, I don't think it would take a mentality change at GW. And the thing is, sorry Sam, I'll let you go in a sec.
I was being put in there quick, James, sorry, because just saying that, I don't know if it's still the case, but I know for a long while there were basically 4 people that kind of like held the purse strings in GW, really made the big decisions in GW. 2 of them adamantly against competitive gaming whatsoever. They think that all their games should be pre and principles games. There's one guy who believes the game can be competitive, and there's one guy sitting on the fence. And all it takes is that guy all it takes is that guy to sit on the fence, to go to the side of it should be beer and pretzels, and then once again we're going to be in a situation where in 6th and 7th where GW just don't care whatsoever.
Well, that brings up something that I was going to mention earlier, is that I think one of the profound, after you've been in 40K for a number of the years, I think one of the profound tensions that's really quite honestly existed as long as the game has existed has been the tension between the beer and pretzels type players and the more competitive side. And people don't fit neatly into one category. Even at just some of the more larger tournaments, like I'm sure like the LVO, you will find people all along the spectrum there. And so the community in many regards is divided because some people will say it's the more the beer and pretzels. They'll be more willing to say it's just a slight mistake, we'll be fine. Other people more competitive will have more invested in it and see themselves having more to lose. And so I think that's a big issue with any sort of form of discipline, is that you have a community that is and how they'd want to have it approached. I think practically, if we want to start thinking about, like some form of conduct, I agree. I think at least in the form of the ITC, with its libertarian focus, trying to be sort of a big tent organization, perhaps the best way is to start with just a couple of, maybe once again, not that any of us run, well, except maybe Neil, have a hand in running large events, but to say like, okay, for this event, we're going to adopt this sort of standard. that exists right from the beginning. We're going to hold everybody to this standard. So if you aren't interested in coming to this, where it is going to be much more intense with the judging, that there might be a little bit less leeway, less sort of benefit of the doubt given. Maybe this isn't the tournament, or maybe this isn't the event for you.
Right, and I agree, and I think just to one point there, like I don't think GW is going to do this, and I don't think, unless there's a huge.
I don't think even Mike's best intentions will ever get.
That's what I'm saying. Like I think even no matter, it doesn't matter if like they hired me to go work at GW and I was the CEO, I still probably couldn't get it done. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just a cultural thing, and obviously as a competitive community, we've got to make peace with that. We've got to accept that we've taken a game that maybe wasn't meant to be played at the level we'd like to play it at, and we've pushed it, we've twisted it, we've kind of pushed and pulled it a little bit to make it fit our enjoyment in some ways. Now, obviously, they've done a much better job in the last 5-6 years with match play and stuff catering to us. But ultimately, there's certain games out there that if you really want that balanced competitive level, that you can go play. And there's things about GW that we love, and it's not so easy. But the one thing I will say though is, I look at some of the ground rules that were laid out after the recent incident with various levels of escalation. So they're like, well, if this happens again, these are the punishments. So do you think it would be like, and maybe I'm like naive, I'm not a TO, I've never run a TO. The most TOing I've ever done is helping move terrain, like before an event. That's the closest thing I've ever come to TO. Or like when people yell at me across the table for like a judge, like a rules question, that's the closest thing I've come to TOing. But like, do you think the main body of TOs, whether they're in Europe, wherever they are, do you think there's an appetite among them to have something like this? Because I actually think these kinds of codified systems actually benefit, to your point, Sam, not just the tie-in players, but all players. I think if I'm a new player going into an event and I know there's some like rules to kind of keep me safe, that are there to protect me from other cheaters, that are there to and then I can read those rules and understand those rules and make sure that I do all my due diligence, right? I actually think that benefits all players, not just these like high competitive players. I think that beer and pretzel player, and again, we're talking about competitive events. We're not saying if someone's cheating on their crusade rules, we're going to come down on them, right? Like we're talking specifically about tournaments, right? So people go into tournaments, even new players, knowing that the reason it's called a tournament, it's because it's a competitive event. And so, but even those new players at tournaments, I feel personally, I think, and I could be wrong, and I'd love to hear if there's any new players out there that just are, like, I think they'd appreciate having a little bit of a rule set or some like basic, because even the ITC code of conduct, it's not like very, very like, it's not like explicit, right? Like you often get one little line that says this event is running the ITC code of conduct, and then you have to go through a 13-page like scavenger hunt through the FLG page to track it down, and it's just not. It's not out there, right? Do you think that would be beneficial, or do you think that there's an appetite for the judges as a whole and the tournament community as a whole to create something? Because with FLG, and I mentioned this earlier, it seems they have really taken a step back from their house ruling, from their scenarios. I don't know what kind of arrangement they have with GW now, but it seems like they're very, very hesitant to do anything to do any sort of modification, even as far as like, I think even the code of conduct they're probably thinking is like, bad.
Well,
but like,
on that, Reese actually said recently in one of his podcasts that they've actually entered an agreement with GW that they're not going, that the ITC FLG are not going to offer alternate rules.
Right. Why do you think that is though? Like, what leverage? What leverage does GW have on the ITC and the FLG? Because they're not playtesters, right, anymore.
They're not playtesters anymore, but I don't know. I mean,
gentlemen.
I think. I mean, this is purely guessing. But I think obviously Mike Brandt, everyone knows his position, global communities manager, and he's been very open. At the end of the day, Tournaments America, North America is where the money is made for GW. They make so much more money in 40k North America than anywhere else in the world. I think I read something that they almost make more money in America than the rest of the world combined when it comes to 40k sales. And tournament attendance is monstrous in North America compared to everywhere else. So Mike Brandt is global events coordinator, but realistically, he is make events, big events in North America, make a pro circuit. That's his goal, and that's what GW have got him for. And I very much feel, and this is me, I haven't had these conversations with these guys. I very much feel like obviously FLG are putting up a lot of events now. And I feel like this is the genesis, the sort of the start. Eventually, end up being some kind of like GW circuit. I feel that FLG were trying to get in on the ground, getting on the ground level there. It'll be their events that will be maybe the majority of the events that GWUs will be their events. I mean, I don't know. All I know is that Reese, it was about maybe you can go back on his, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago on his podcast. He actually said, he just said they were in an agreement, and that's the agreement.
Right.
And I also know from the WTC perspective, is that historically GW have hated the ETC. I mean, but hate's a polite word for what they felt about the ETC.
Really interesting.
They have very much warmed to us since 40k broke away and became the WTC, and because it's myself and Tom himself is a playtester and has a lot of contact with Robin and that, they very much more war, and because Mike, who was actually also very anti ETC very vocal about it. You can go listen to his interview on Game Changers with Steve Joel, and he says he was super anti ETC. But when he came and he realized what it was about, he's like, actually, this is his impressions were wrong, and he realizes it's about something more than what he thought it was. He thought it was very elitist and these kind of things. And because of this, their attitude is very much mellow to us, and we're actually getting more involved with them. We're getting more involved with their FAQs and stuff. They're actually wanting to see our FAQs. We obviously have a big FAQ, WTC FAQ, and one of the things they've asked us to do, we try not to rock the boat, is they've asked us to wait until they put out their FAQ before we put out our FAQs. Like Dark Eldar, people are asking us what our answers are going to be. We've been involved in the conversation with GW, and GW like, GW will publish its official FAQ, and then we'll publish all the stuff that they didn't answer, and that makes GW happy because they understand what we need to do, but they don't want us to tread on their toes either. And it's all about mutual agreement there, and it is warming. I mean, it definitely is warming. Like I said, 3 years ago, you couldn't even mention ETC in GW's head office. It was a banned word. I'm not joking. It was banned from being said. I had friends of mine who work at head office, and they're like, you can't talk about it, and it's mellowing. And I think there's a genuine mellowing to competitive 40k. I think this is a good thing. So, and going to your thing, Jim, you're saying about, are people passionate to do this? Yeah, I think if you talk to any of the guys at LVO and the refs there, or any refs at any big event, you don't do it. There's no money in it, and at the end of the day, it's not that fun. A lot of the time, you get pestered for such annoying, pedantic questions, or you get pestered for questions that are in the rule book and people just haven't been able to look in themselves. Most of the time, it's just you wasting your time doing the same thing over and again. But you do it. But the reason why I became a referee, or most people became referees, is because you got fed up with shit. I mean, I take the example, and I say this straight away: competitive 40k is so much better than what it used to be. I mean, I've been playing competitively since third ed, and back then, third ed, fourth ed, fifth ed, even sixth ed, cheating was an accepted part of the game. It was like, it was almost expected, like the joke of Italian footballers.
Crime,
the joke of Italian footballers, soccer players cheating all the time. It's part of their game, and there's always that kind of meme, that joke about them. It was like that. It was horrendous, and obviously I was very much involved in the WTC, and the WTC was horrific for it as well. And I basically just lost my rag and I said, I'm not going to play anymore at this event. But I believe this event can be amazing, so I'm going to become a referee and sort it out. And I think a lot of, I speak for guys like Tiffus and that, guys who've been referees with me regularly at the WTC for many years, they're the same. They just, Tiffus Piotr, he's actually the best player in Poland. He's the number 1 ranked player in Poland. He picks the Polish team, but he's so passionate about cleaning the game up that he's going to be a referee and play. And I think that can be said for a lot of players. So I think there is a lot of passion there amongst say, these regular referees, the dedicated referees, to do something about it. And it's just, like you say, it's about getting it together and getting that organisation together and getting the funding, getting the backing, getting the whatever we need to do it and to get the community to buy into it. Yeah. It wouldn't take much, but it would take something.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I'm not too familiar with many judges. I know a couple TOs. I've run an event, and sort of I agree with Neil. My experience was spending just at an RTT, spending pretty much the entire afternoon being the ringer and then running away from the table every 20 minutes to answer somebody's inane question. But it was fun. But yeah, at the most recent event that sparked a lot of the stuff, I was there. I played a couple rounds at the beginning, but then I had to leave before the end. I thought the TO did a great job, especially with dealing with such a high profile thing. But I think it does sort of show that the importance of trying to establish a lot of I know we haven't gotten to redemption yet. We're like an hour in, but about of having like a standard that you can say beforehand, like if this happens, then you can just point to this, rather than at the end of it, I mean, people are going to say whatever they want to say online, but you either no punishment is going to please people. But if you have a standard at the beginning of the tournament, you say, well, we're just following the rules, and it's going to allay a lot of at least some of that feedback. So so one of the things I do in my job is I work with in a university to make sure that we hold to our accreditation standards. And one of the things that I always hear is that when institutions get in trouble with their accreditors is when they have a specific sort of standard or policy that doesn't get followed. And so I think trying to build some of those policies ahead of time will give people a standard and give TOs somewhere to point. And I think in some ways, I think it's kind of interesting when you shift the sort of the wheel of discipline, I guess you say, trying to figure out what the infringement is to sit to an established standard. It's going to push it more than I think on the players in some ways to try and make some of those judgment calls about whether somebody's infringing. Because like I said, if I've been playing for a while, I come to a table, somebody else has just been playing for 6 months, it's their first tournament, and then they have the number of runes wrong somewhere. We come back, like we said, there's one rune left on that Talon Masters. I can give them the benefit of the doubt. Later on, we find out it's less. It's going to be up to me as the player. Do I want to call a judge on that person or not?
Right.
I mean, until we have sort of robo judges hovering over every single table, it's really going to be at that point. And so I think that's really, I think that's a lot of times a good play, because I think a lot of times players know and can kind of guess on the just based on how their opponent performs about how familiar they are with the game in terms of whether to flag that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a learning process, isn't it? Like you said, I mean,
Yeah.
this kind of, you can kind of stick this into the whole redemption we're going to talk about. That at the end of the day, everyone will make mistakes. I mean, I say this, loads of people say this. Everyone believes this. Nobody plays a perfect game.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody ever plays a perfect game. You're always going to accidentally move an inch too far or do something, a little bit too much. And we've all done it. Like how many times you picked up, you're all in 3 pluses, you pick up a 2 by accident. You probably goes, oh, that was a 2. You play. In fact, you make mistakes. I mean, I'm probably the worst for rules mistakes. I maybe the WTC head referee doesn't mean I know the rules. In fact, I played the game for so many years, I confuse rules all the time.
Oh yeah, that happens.
And it's just a thing, and it's a learning process, and it's all about it's about learning how to deal with that. When you make these mistakes, how do you deal with them as a person? When you personally make a mistake, how do you deal with it? How do you love avoid it in the future? And they say, and you're going to talk about people deliberately cheating, people getting tempted. Because I think most of the time, I say it's not, people don't go to a game and think I'm gonna cheat, but it's that temptation, and it's they haven't learned to say no to temptation.
Right. So
and that's what it's really about.
And I do want to try to push the conversation, because I love that. By the way,
I know you do, Jim. I'm trying to.
No, by the way, I love that it's been an hour. That's the whole. All my shows, none of them have any sort of time limit. But I guess so. One of the there's a few. I think it was important that we talked about that, because I think when it comes to the concept of rehabilitation, intent is a big part of it. And something that we talked about is the punishment. And oftentimes we confuse like rehabilitation, whether or not that requires retribution. So when we as a community feel like that person has been punished, right? They've been, either, and I'm not talking about revenge, because obviously that's a little bit different. But when we talk about kind of the concept of justice, rehabilitation and retribution are kind of two separate concepts. And with retribution, what we're essentially doing is we're punishing. It's very kind of like amoral in a sense, where it's like someone has done something bad, and so we're going to, as a way to show that behavior was bad, there's a punishment involved, but it's not like personal, right? We're not doing this out of a sense of revenge, right? We're not like, oh, we hate that person. But we understand that we need to separate these people out of our community until we can rehabilitate them, because they are harm to that specific community, whether it's the game or in real life. And so when I think about the idea of punishment, which is what we've been talking about, I do think it's really important that we hold in our head that like there needs to be a punishment first, because no one is going to accept a rehabilitation if they felt like you got off without any sort of like outcome. Like if I said, hey,
Yeah.
Jim was caught cheating, but guys, I'm going to start apologizing a lot, but there's, besides my apologizing, there's real no other consequences. People aren't going to buy, and maybe that's a good thing or bad thing, and we can talk about that. They're not going to accept the fact that I'm now working on my rehabilitation. What's the incentive at that point for me to rehabilitate myself if the worst outcome is me just apologizing? And I think that also goes to the idea about denunciation, which is like, and this is something that I actually found really weird, and I just want to touch on it quickly. You know, even us, we've been dancing around naming and shaming, right? That's a big thing that we try to avoid. And I had mentioned that we want to avoid that, not because I don't think it should be done within its own context, but just because I think in general, it's been already talked about a million times on the internet. But do you guys think that the whole concept of like, you know, in the old days, right, before there was TV, shame was a big deterrent in cheating, right? So if you shamed your family or your community, you were, you know, it was the town crier would call out that you did XYZ, and that alone, that fear of denunciation by your community was a big deterrent. And sometimes I kind of feel like, I don't know if it's like a thing about like manners, but like sometimes I feel like we're too hesitant to actually just call out the people that cheated and blatantly call them out and say, hey, so and so did this thing and it was bad. Almost, I'd say about 80% of the podcasts and shows that I listened to in the last week, half of them didn't name specific people. It's very trying to dance around it, trying to, you know, beat around the bush, alluding to things but not really saying it. Do you think there's a benefit, or do you think there's a place for us to actually denounce people that do that cheat? And that obviously comes with that ties in with the concept of intent, which is if someone didn't intend to do them, do we really want to throw them under the bus publicly? But if they did intend to do it, then I think that is actually appropriate to do something like that. So what are your guys' thoughts on like that whole concept of calling people out and making sure that everyone knows that there's this person, they did something bad, and everyone needs to know about it?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
agree. Sorry.
one of
Sorry,
the
Sam.
yeah, that's fine. I'll take this one. One of the things I think that makes the whole thing tricky is that there is such, and we even saw it with this event, even with a lot of people trying to avoid naming and shaming, is that you kind of get these online mobs forming. And so how do you, I mean, how do you responsibly walk that line between sort of trying to, you know, to call out people and sort of say like, you know, since, you know, we have these public standards, then people who infringe on that standard, it's a public matter, versus like enabling a mob to attack people. And it's a fine line to walk. I don't think I have a good answer for how do you do that. I think an element of it is very important that people know, uh, you know, some of the reputation of some of the past events that people have gone through, and that if you develop that reputation, as sort of I did as a toxic player, it was very much in a way on me to prove myself to my community, to my fellow players, like I've changed and I want to show you that I've
Right.
changed, and so here's how I'm going about doing that. So yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
quickly before you jump in here, Neil. So to your point, and actually it is something that is really tied into rehabilitation. So in the absence of a good way to for people to rehabilitate, I think there is this tendency, and in the absence of a good set of circumstances and punishment, it kind of creates this environment where people feel like they need to be the take on their vigilante justice.
Yeah.
And so I would think, like, I
Yes.
look at our criminal justice system, and I know ours is fucked in Canada. I'm sure it's you guys
Everything's
you guys
fine
are
here.
burning
Everybody's
down half
checking. There's
the
nothing
like
going on in
everywhere
Minneapolis
has
right
criminal
now.
justice. But here's the thing: it seems to me in real life crime, there's actually a lot more empathy for people that commit crimes and that go through their punishment. And you know, you look at people that are ex-cons that come out of jail, they go through this rehabilitation, they get reformed. There's a lot more empathy, it seems to me, from most people that like, hey, this person served their time, they paid their dues. And obviously there's things like parole, there's obviously a lot of million layers there. But it seems to me that there's this empathy piece that people understand when someone's gone through that system, they've paid their dues, they've done their community service, they've, you know, cleaned up the garbage, they've served their parole. We should then accept them back into, and I'm a progressive, so I believe in that kind of, you know, people paid their dues, they paid their punishment, and we need to accept them back. But because when that's lacking, right, which I think it is in a lot of ways in our
Yeah.
system, you end up in the system where people take it upon themselves through that mob mentality, through that kind of like name and shame and whatever. Everyone takes justice into their own hands, so to speak. So I think the rehabilitation is not just a rehabilitation of the person, but also of the community and how we treat people like this as well. Because it is super problematic to me that it's gotten this out of hand, that the personal attacks, the death threats, like that to me, it really speaks to a larger issue with our community, that people are acting this way. And I think the rehabilitation needs to happen both from the personal person of that person that cheated, but also the community needs to rehabilitate its behavior as well.
Yeah, as I said when we started this podcast, I think a big deal is the community needs to get a big breath. And like you say, collectively, rehabilitation, collectively stop doing this, acting the way it acts when these things happen. But I wonder, like you say, there are punishments. Some tournaments, some codified punishments. Some tournaments have been very, very upfront about certain punishments when certain players have done things. LGT, was it 3 years ago? Very, very upfront about how they punish a particular player. But I think there's a big problem is that, as you say, with the advent of streaming, when you have these high-profile incidents of someone cheating, and it's very, very, very clear that it's not a mistake. This is actually a malicious, deliberate attempt to cheat the game and break the rules. I think the problem is that I can't think of any of those. I can think of a lot of cases where this has happened. And I'm struggling to think of a case where any of these very high-profile players, these high-profile cases of cheating, where that person has actually actively gone about rehabilitating themselves. There are players that have reps and have kept these reps for a very long time because they haven't changed their ways at all. Yeah, there is, again, not naming shaming, but there is a very simple reason why the WTC came up with a statement a couple of months ago saying we're not going to allow cheaters at our event. That doesn't just mean cheaters who have cheated WTC. That means if you're a cheater at another tournament, you may well not be allowed to come to the WTC.
Right.
And it was a very big deal. We're actually not going to punish people. We are potentially excluding people for stuff they've done outside our event, but the reason for it was because obviously of what we are an event. But I feel that the reason for that to do is because we had players there were some players who cheated, who were endemic cheats and unrelenting, did not care to attempt to redeem themselves whatsoever. And they were wanting, and you see their names popping up as potential players of teams. It's like we do not want that kind of person at this event. I think there's a problem that people haven't. There hasn't been this redemption story. There hasn't been a person. I can think of one person that has sort of redeemed themselves, but it wasn't really cheating. It's more his attitude. He's a toxic player. But in terms of these these diehard cheats, they haven't changed their ways. They've either drifted off and disappeared, or they just continued. Took it as a badge, some kind of badge, and just played on with it. So I think therefore that the community, there's a lot of frustration maybe in the community. It's like, here we go again. Right. One more person, another person doing this, and nothing's gonna be resolved. And I mean, there's maybe a little bit of frustration.
Right. There. Do you think? And this is maybe a question for both of you. We talked about intent, and again, this is why I wanted to have that kind of preamble, just because I think it ties into a lot of the issues, but. I know there's lots of players that get caught for quote unquote cheating, that in their head they don't feel like they cheated. Like they think maybe what they were doing is above board. We've all heard of the famous example with I'm sure if you I don't know the whole situation with the Alex Harrison water bottle incident, but I'm sure and I'm saying if you want to give people the most benefit of the doubt, there's probably situations of cheating that we've all seen where you could say, okay, if that person, maybe that was accidental. Now it's very clear that whatever the outcome was, they picked up the wrong amount of models. That was cheating, but the intent was accidental. Do you think that, and this is something that TJ did that I would definitely commend him for, do you think that regardless of whether that player thinks that they cheated, a first step in this rehabilitation process is, even if they maybe in their heart of hearts don't think that they cheated, maybe it was just, they were zoned out, they were whatever reason you want to think about it. I don't want to defend anyone, but even in their heart of hearts, if they feel that they don't cheated, do you think it's incumbent on anyone that's caught cheating to come out and admit it right away, take ownership of it? Or, because a lot of times they just don't say anything. I don't think a lot of the famous cheaters that we've heard of, I've never seen them publicly address it and say, no, I did cheat, I did do this, and I need to be better. Oftentimes there's no public, or there's a lot of excuses and whatever. So how important do you think that is to the process, even if that player might not fully believe that. Because I think there's sometimes that they're so wrapped up in their own way that they play that they don't even realize they are cheating. It's almost subconscious level, or they've been doing it for so long. Those kinds of like edge pushing the envelope there. They've been doing it for so long that it doesn't even register as cheating. So how important do you think that is as a first step to rehabilitate players?
I think when it's something like that, when it's caught on camera, that it's very obvious, regardless of whether you thought you cheated or not. Like that one's more, I think, more cut and dry to say. Like obviously, I screwed up, and by this definition, the screw up gave me advantage. Advantage may or may not have shifted the game, but at least it had an impact, and so therefore it's on me. Like any mistake that I made, I mean, fundamentally is going to be on me, and so I have to take responsibility for it, and whatever implications that might have. But I think also too, if anybody, God forbid, finds themselves in this situation, I think something to think about is that you had in some of the Reddit posts, and who knows how many of these people were telling the truth or not, a number of people expressing that they had similar experiences, that they knew other people who had had similar experiences. So I think if you find yourself being accused of cheating, even if you didn't, thinking about, if a lot of people are coming out and saying that they've had sort of similar experiences or profoundly negative experiences, maybe it's you. Maybe that there are things that you're doing that other people are just too polite to call out, or and that's why I think one thing to go back to intent is that there are ways that you can play just based on your trigger that can cause you to gain an advantage or to cheat without you necessarily know. We like to think that everybody who we catch, cheating is just standing off to the side, twirling their mustache, stroking their cat, and laughing maniacally. But a lot of times it isn't that sort of cut and dry necessarily, and so that you can do that, especially if you develop bad habits that haven't been called out before.
Yeah, I think that the mustache twirling style cheating, that is the one that really draws traction. People maybe move models too far and do these kind of things, and it's like the community might get upset, call it out, but there is a clear distinction between that, the reaction to that, and the reaction to, I mean, I'll name a name. Patrick Sanfilippo is a player in the UK who's notorious to the point that he would go to a table, place a die inside a room, face up 6, then roll to go first and pick that die out. Roll his die into the room and pick that die out.
Shit.
And he did this at multiple events and was caught multiple times and continues to do this thing. And this is just one example of many things he deliberately, calculatedly did. And obviously, the reaction to him doing that is huge, and when he does it, is absolutely massive. Whereas, like you say, a guy, I basically became very. At one point, I became very lazy with my movement, and I got called out for it. And a friend of mine said to me, like, "Neil, no offense, we're tired of your happy movement. Like, fucking tighten it up. It's getting annoying."
Yeah.
And I was like, "What?" I was like, "You don't realize it, but you're always moving fucking 7 inches. You just been too lazy with your movement. Measure it properly, for God's sake." And that actually was quite embarrassing for me. And actually, like, I felt shamed. I was like, really? Is that really what you guys think? All right, shit, sorry. I'm going to sort this out, And so there is that, the degree, there's a thing about the degrees and reaction to the degrees. And then there's this notoriousness that is happening a lot. And then unfortunately, there is also this thing that certain players get caught. Mm-hmm. There is a bigger reaction because they are more public, they're seen as more community leaders and stuff, and people feel very disappointed or let down when that happens as well.
That's next level, by the way. I just blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's so like sneaky. I was like, I never would have thought of something like that.
Have you not heard of it? This is it's one of many things he's done. One of many things, and it's like that level of that there is that level, and that creates so much outrage. And I think then when you have, for example, what happened a couple of weeks ago, people see that as, well, is it calculated like this kind of person? These other things we've seen previously, and it can create this huge outrage again. But then what you said, Sam, and then people start coming out of the woodwork and saying, "Oh, I knew loads of people this happened to. This happens all the time." It's like, well, if it was happening all the time, why hasn't anyone spoken about it yet?
Do you think?
There's also that.
Do you think that? So say there's an incidence of accusation of cheating, like there was a few weeks ago on video. Do you think that TOs should give the player like should the first step to be to confront the player and ask them and get them to, because sometimes I'm always curious if like some people are regretful after they've been caught, right? Publicly at least, right? Or if like,
Mhm.
if Sam, if you cheated and Neil saw it and then I, without even talking to you, said, yeah, I agree with you on the video and here's your punishment. So I've already made my decision. You've cheated and here you go. But if I said, okay, I'm going to come to Sam, explain yourself. Do you think if I asked you, Sam, or in some theoretical situation, don't you think players would probably be more likely to try to defend themselves than to just be like, yeah, you know what? You guys caught me. You're right. I did cheat. Like that, I feel like actually is like a unicorn. Like, if there's enough public pylon to
Mhm.
pressure that person to finally be like, yeah, I did cheat. I think I've seen that happen. I don't think I've ever seen someone after the fact come out and say, "Yeah, I tried to cheat and I was caught." Like it just seems like,
Yeah.
and I don't know if it's just because maybe the TOs aren't giving them that opportunity, or
Well, I think one of the things that I mean, not to sort of make a broad brush case, but I think how quickly somebody apologizes for when they get caught cheating will tell you a little bit about how they feel occasionally. That I think that there are some people who kind of wait until that I'm just gonna wait until like till I like to call it like my mom told me I had to apologize phase. Is like after a certain amount of time we kind of get to that. It's like, all right, so we know you're going to have to apologize at some point because the public outrage is just going to keep building until you do. um, but yeah, I think I know it's an interesting question. I'm curious to hear what you think, Neil, about like how people would respond, because I feel like if I was out of the blue asked by a judge about a specific thing, I would think, well, maybe and I knew I had cheated on that one. I might sort of see that as like a come to Jesus moment. But I think that those interactions will give you a better idea as a judge of that person's character,
Yeah.
than necessarily whether they cheated or not.
I mean, like, this is going to sound pretty crazy, but I think the most important thing, first of all, as a judge referee, is like you say, you actually need to go and talk to these people. Because I've seen it so
wild.
many
It's
times
a
that
wild
people.
suggestion.
No, but
No,
it's wild.
I'm being
It is
sarcastic. It
wild. But
seems
I've seen
really
it so many.
basic, but I feel like it doesn't happen.
But I've seen it so many times. When people, someone comes and makes a complaint either during the event or after the fact, and a decision is made without actually talking to the other person. That happens a lot. And like you say, Sam, when you go and talk to these people, you know, you see it. You see it written on their faces. Very, very, you know, the like I said, the example of me and my happy movement, as like Daniel and Jimmy the Swedes put it, I was like, what? I was like kind of shocked. I'm pretty sure it showed in my face. I was like, what? Oh, I'm shocked and embarrassed. Whereas, like the guy who brought the loaded dice just 'cause it's a lucky charm to the WTC,
Mm.
that when he sees me and the other referees approaching his table, he grabs the dice, put it behind his back, and his entire body language, everything was screaming, "Oh fuck, I'm in trouble now." Before he even said a word to him, it was just like screaming out in his body language. And I know it's like obviously maybe someone's very good at hiding that, but most of the time, people are more afraid of being named and shamed in public. The majority of people, like you said before, this whole shaming is part of rehabilitation. It's part of accepting the shame of what you've done wrong, and it's painful as well. And accepting that your reputation, your name has been tarnished, and you're going to be associated with the shame, and working through it. And I feel that for the vast majority of people, unless you're like a sociopath or something, most people, that is actually probably the most powerful deterrent,
Mm.
or the most powerful incentive to not do it again after you've been caught,
Mhm.
because nobody wants to be labeled as anything, and it hurts, you probably won't lose friends over it, but your friends are going to look at you a bit funny for a while and stuff like this. So when you do confront these players, I've covered countless players over the years, and it's super obvious. Like, it's very, very rare. I've confronted a player who's like, doing something incredibly dodgy, and it's not written all over their faces when they do. When you go up to them, it's literally like you see the "oh shit, why is a referee here" moment kind of on their
Right.
faces. It's like, and that's the thing, and it is, and because they get called, and they know they're going to get called out for it. They know, and the punishment, whatever it be, it's probably the calling out. It's more painful than
Right.
anything. I
Do
believe
you,
that.
now I think I mentioned earlier, like I, you know we can have a whole conversation about free will, so I won't get into that. But I guess one of the things that I do believe is that sometimes, people, the way that they do, maybe they do something that's wrong. They don't always necessarily, it's not always maybe like malicious. Like I do believe that we need to have compassion
Yeah.
and pity in some sense for people that make bad choices for whatever reasons, make dumb choices, make these kinds of decisions. And, we punish them and we shame them. But I also want to have compassion for those people and say, you know what, like, especially in the context that we're talking about, it's one thing to forgive the person that murdered your brother, right? It's a whole other thing to forgive someone that may have left an extra model on or changed a dice roll. Like those
Yeah.
are very, very different things, and it'd be a lot easier for me to forgive the second one than the first one. But even in those cases of like, you see in real life, you see lots of situations where people forgive people that have committed horrendous crimes against them, because there's a sense of compassion when someone does something wrong, and sense of like, there's something broken with that person. And I think there's some people that have those attitudes of cheating, there's an entitlement there. There's maybe someone that wins and they feel like they deserve to continuously winning, right? They just they feel like, this is a bad player, so the dice, if they're not going my way, shouldn't really affect the fact that I actually deserve to win this game. So I'm going to do that kind of like push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, or there's external pressures, like, for example, you're playing a team event and you feel like you let your team down or something like that. There's external pressures. I mean, you feel like I have to win this game because of X. And we've all been there. I mean, everyone's been there. Everyone's been there. That little red devil on your shoulder saying, "Pick up that extra die. He won't notice." Or do that. Everyone's been there. And the difference is when you can you're able to ignore that. Or, but again, because I truly believe that there probably is a couple of people, and the majority of people don't walk up to a table and say, "I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna cheat in this game today." Yeah, but it's that temptation. It's not even a temptation. It's that pressure. That's sort of like that little voice in your head, and instead of ignoring it and just carrying on, you cave and you listen to it. You succumb to it. I think that's the problem there. And like you say, there's compassion, because that's a for lack of a better word, that's a character flaw.
Yeah.
And it's a character flaw, that somebody that you want to help someone remove that flaw from them. Everyone has flaws, and nobody's perfect. But we don't spit. I'm dyslexic. Does that mean that people have the right to like laugh at me, poke fun at me, spit at me, whatever? Because I struggle to read. No, it's a flaw I have, and I think that for the vast majority of cheaters, and I say cheaters, but we'll just say, because that's what everyone gets labeled as, I think it is a flaw in them, and it's a flaw that you need to, just like an addict or whatever, you need to help them, because at the end of the day, these people aren't intrinsically bad people. I believe that, and you want to help them, because sooner or later it might be you, or it might be your mate.
Right.
That gets caught, that does this thing and gets caught. And if that's the case, you'd hope that the community would help you as well. So it needs to start with you helping these people and encouraging them. I say, don't defend them. I'm not defending any person whatsoever. I'm not condoning what they're doing, But if they accept the pain, they accept the shame, and they want to work through it to get out the other side and not do this again, then I will happily help them do that. I think that's what the community needs to do.
I agree, and like I always think of the there's that like descent into like the fall, right? Like, and it's like everyone always starts thinking, as you mentioned, with good intentions, thinking, and like I would argue, and this is something that I felt, and I know I've talked to lots of other players that have played at a very high level. There's a reason that you hear about it more at those kinds of players, because there's this mentality where as you start winning, you should continue to win. And especially, there's a comment in the chat about how the hobby has become very commodified. People are selling themselves as brands, they're coaches, they're selling services. All of a sudden, there's more on the line than just the prize of the tournament. There's you're standing in the hobby and in the community as a competitive player could financially affect you in a lot of ways. Like I self-admit I'm like terrible at Warhammer these days, because I've played 3 games of 9th edition, and we're almost a year into the edition, right? Outside of some TTS, which if you ask John Wirebeller, it doesn't actually count. So I guess so like and I'm not ashamed of that. I don't hide that fact. Like but I guess the point is like, well, I have no financial incentive to pretend that I'm better at it than I am, right? Like, and hopefully one day I will figure out how to play again. But for a lot of players, there is that incentive, and like that's a very hard, I guess, temptation to push back on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I saw that firsthand with a very good guy who I feel is a very good friend of mine, and how he acted towards me as a referee at a tournament. And it was all because he felt the pressure to win that event was important, because it meant, obviously standing in the ITC and the monetary association with that, not in terms of just winning the ITC, but in terms of what his business is, what his job is. He has to win these events. He has to win tournaments to, justify his, existence, so to speak, within the business of 40K. Right. And he basically lashed out at me in a way, and it was like, when I didn't take it standing once. I didn't take it. I slapped him down very hard as a referee. But we had a long conversation about it afterwards. I was like, "What is this about?" And it was just like, it was that pressure was getting into him. It was all just, he was just kind of becoming too fixated on the win,
right,
and that what the not winning could do for him. And I think there is that pressure there it's a small group of people, but it's a very public group of people, a very high profile group of people. There is definitely that pressure there for them. I mean,
I was gonna say, so I was just gonna say, like, so what's next then? Like, so we've agreed that we think that they do need to come out and admit they've done something. So what do you guys think is the next step, I guess? Because imagine we had to create, I know there's like AA for alcoholics. Like, if we had to create a 10-step program, step one, I think, is just admitting that you've committed that crime. You've come, you've and publicly as well. It's not just it's taking your lumps in public. What do you think the next step would be for someone that is really interested in rehabilitating their reputation and that wants to still be part of the community, that wants to come back? What do you think the next thing that they should really be focusing on? How do they, because I've been reading the Reddit thread, there's like almost 100 comments, and a lot of them are people with zero compassion, zero, everyone's like, banned forever, lifetime bans. Like, I'm like, guys, like, can we just have a bit of perspective, right? We think that's extreme. I think we would all agree that there should probably be a escalating series of outcomes and punishments based on repeated incidents. And from what it sounds like, Neil, there's people that you've interacted with, and I've never met these people because maybe we're pretty nice in Canada. Although I do know they exist even in our scene. There's, and if you talk to some of our TOs, our TO Dan and some of our other buddies that run a lot of the events here, there's like, we have 2 or 3 players that are literally banned from every event in British Columbia because they just have shown a repeated inability to not cheat, or to at least not have really awful table play, to the point where they're toxic to our events. People, if they show up at an event, people don't want to go to those events. People will not attend. And so that's obviously at the extreme level, right? But, and we know that there are players like that exist. But there's an in-between here, right? So how do we, what is the next step for players once they've been caught cheating and admitted to cheating? And a lot of them don't, right? I'd say majority of them don't, right?
No.
But
I mean, what's happened? This is the first. What's happened? This is the first time I've seen someone publicly doing that I can remember, or at least as high profile as this. Maybe there are other people, but I don't remember anyone doing it, actually coming out and saying, "Yeah, I am wrong."
And I think that speaks a lot to the TJ's desire to be better,
make amends.
One thing I will say though, and I hope this is like, we haven't had a lot of drama. People have been kind of cooped up in their houses for a long time, not playing events. So I do feel like in a lot of ways, the community was just like, it was like a volcano about to erupt, waiting for that like piece of meat that everyone could pile onto. And I think, unfortunately, in this specific incident, like, if this had happened in 6 months or in 8 months, it probably would have been much less of a deal. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think people were just kind of biting at the, like, just waiting to jump onto someone to do this.
And it is something I'm kind of hoping is a little bit of a wake-up call, just to see, sort of, Neil, like you're saying, for the community to try and take a breath and sort of measure the reactions. Because out of all the, the old saying goes that, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and few houses are more made of glass than those occupied by 40K players. And so, I think that hopefully there's another side of a bit of a wake-up call here for that that this community is susceptible to the same sort of mob mentality that everyone else is, and so let's take a quick minute before you submit that comment, before you send that tweet, to think about what you're going to say.
Yeah.
But in terms of rehabilitation, and this is one of the things that I can think about as a slogan, but I'm not sure a great way to prove it is that if somebody is looking to rehabilitate themselves, one of the things I'm always kind of curious about is, do you care more about playing the game, or do you care more about winning? Because I think a lot of times when you get into that mindset of I have to win for X, Y, or Z, it shows, and it's apparent. I've played with people who love to play 40K, and I've played with people who just love to win. And so if you can try and show me, I mean, not that anybody's morally obligated to show me that how they've changed, but I think that's an important difference. I'm not sure what's a great way to do that besides sentencing people, like I said in my article, to play Crusade games or Apocalypse games or something along those lines.
Yeah. I would say obviously, first of all, we need to let these people play games. There's no point. Apart from, as you say, Jim, there is an extreme minority that will never redeem themselves, and once they get to that point, no offense, just don't. You expect to just never have them again. But for the majority of people that find themselves in this situation, you need to allow them to redeem themselves, like a cool off period, so everyone can take a breath. But you need to allow them, and then that person needs to deal with the shame and still get back on the horse, get back into tournament. In case, okay, go to tournaments again, and he's going to show up to the first tournament. TJ, we'll take TJ as an example. The first tournament TJ shows to go up to, it's not going to be fun for him.
No,
it's not going to be fun for him at all. But you got to accept that, and you got to accept that for quite a while, it's not going to be particularly fun for you in terms of you're going to feel that vibe off people. But you just got to accept that. And what you need to do is you need to hold yourself to the highest possible standards of, we'll say, your gameplay. So, I mean, it sounds really over the top, but really make sure your opponent knows what you're doing at all times. Really be more than open with all your information. Really overdo it. And also, I think what's very important is if there's any instances of what should happen, give your opponent the benefit of the doubt. Put the bias to your opponent and say, is it, opponent says, is this charge range in or out? And I do this all the time personally. But it's like if I measure my opponent, if you and me playing Sam, and you charge my guy, and you're like, is he in or out? I'll say he's in. But if I measure to you and it's like, is he in or out? I'll say I'm out. And I think that there's a kind of integrity that you need to demonstrate that you're not in any way trying to take advantage of anything. And it sounds easy, but it's hard. It's hard even for players who haven't been through this to hold themselves up to high standards and make sure there's a lot of openness in games and stuff. And it's just got to be an active process. It's got to be vocal. It's got to be active, and it's got to be continual. There's no like I say it's not like hey when there's 10 steps to do. It's just a case of like what was it Brad Chester says, play with intent, play open, and always give your opponent benefit of the doubt. I think that's the way you got to do it. Just play that way. Go back to that real kind of basics way. Almost like every opponent you're playing, you're teaching the game rather than trying to play the game against them.
And maybe there's even a little bit, it'll change the types of lists you bring, because I know that there are certain players who rely on sort of odd or strange combinations. But maybe, especially if you're trying to rebuild yourself, maybe take a list that isn't like this insane combination one, but someone where there is less sort of gray area or less room for you to be misinterpreted along those lines, as a way to, I don't know, try and show good faith.
And what do you think? What do you guys think the community should do? Because I kind of feel like, just like I'd want that, I guess, code of conduct, like in a sense, one of the things that I worry about is, if they do make a mistake now, an unintentional mistake in the future. So say TJ or, Alex or whatever, any of these people that have these reputations, they show up in an event and it turns out their list is 5 points over, right? Now immediately the first assumption is that it's a cheat. It's not. And so how
grab the pitch.
Yeah. So how do we as a community turn that around? Because I think that if someone is shown that to say that if you cheated once and were caught, that they're going to play perfect games, just like you said, Neil. They're not going to play perfect games. There will be incidents on stream again, I bet you, in the future, that will call into question their were they genuine? Are they still trying to push it? Like these are things that are going to happen in the future. Now, is that something that they just have to live with forever? That like that cloud, or how do we get past that as a community? Because I do think like yes, there's a point where there's obviously again using criminal justice, you go to jail, but then you're on parole. You have a year of parole, let's say, and in that year of parole, you have to check in. You're very closely watched. But then after that year of parole, when you're kind of free of your parole, whatever, you're obviously if you reoffend, your punishment might be more severe. But most people don't know that you previously offended. So imagine if every time someone was out of parole, we made them walking around with a sign that said, "Hey, I was in prison." And now anytime they do anything, everyone around them, even if they don't know that history, is going to be assuming the worst, or assuming that they're a criminal and they have bad intent. That's essentially what we do in the 40K community because it's so small. We know the cheaters. We know the people that were caught for cheating for the most part. Everyone has these reputations, and it's like impossible to get away. It's like you're basically walking around with a sign that's saying, if I make a mistake, it's probably because I'm cheating. Like it's that like hard to get away from that reputation. So is there a way forward, or is this something now that they just have to live with forever?
I mean, there is a way forward. Continue demonstrating that you are, you are, implementing and showing these kind of behaviors that would make it very hard for your opponent to think you're doing something dodgy. And by continuing doing that, you'll hopefully, at least within your community and the people that play regularly, you'll diminish the opinion towards you. Unfortunately, the internet will not play against you. The internet won't know you from Joe, so there will be people who always just hold that torch and say, "Oh, he cheated," I'll never forget it, But I think that then comes down to the community again has to take a step back. If you're not directly involved, if did TJ directly cheat against you? No. So why are you writing death threats on Reddit?
Yeah.
Extreme example, but simple example. I said I had a long conversation with TJ yesterday. He reached out to me to have a chat with me about some stuff, about what's going on, and he said to me like, "Aren't you really angry with me? If you're pissed off and you want to give me shit, give me shit." I was like, "I'm not. I'm disappointed." But why would I be angry with you? Why would I call you names or write shit about you, TJ? Because nothing you've done affects me.
Yeah.
You've not cheated against me. You've not hurt me or done anything in any way to the enjoyment of 40K or whatever. So why would I be talking shit about you? I wouldn't. There's no reason I would be, and that's why I haven't been, and that's why I wouldn't be. I think people just have to remember that. People just have to take a breather. Because they say it's so easy. This mob mentality is so easy to jump on board. You grab your pitchforks. Oh, yeah, everyone else is doing it, so I'm going to do it. But just calling where we're at, the majority of 40K competitive 40K players are in our 30s and 40s now. We're not kids anymore. I think I read some of the demographic year in year out. The average age of tournaments is increasing continually. We maybe were 20 somethings when we started. We're not now, and we just need to act like adults a little bit. I think just be less impact. It is a hobby. We're very passionate about hobby. And you just got to separate it somewhat. Like I said, Sam, take a step back. Give yourself 5 minutes before you send that tweet or you post that post and just breathe and think about what am I writing and who am I writing to and why am I doing that?
Right.
I think we're just way too, with social media and the way things are, it's just it's not just 40K, just in general how reactionary things are and how fast things snowball and escalate. Just generally, people, us as a society, we need to take a chill. We need to breathe. We need to just calm down a little bit. And 40K specifically, we definitely need to.
I was gonna say, going forward, like you said, like some people, once you've been called out for cheating, for some people, that's like it's pretty much that's what your character is for the rest of your life. And at the same time, there's an element to that in that if you do sort of cheat in a habitual way and get caught in that, there is sort of like the cat's out of the bag a little bit, so that's what people will typically watch for going forward in the future, and that's where the scrutiny is going to be. And so I think that's where it gets complicated if there are other like infractions of like maybe you're going over on points value or something else. So yeah, it's interesting. I think, like I said, you can rehabilitate your character a little bit if you kind of show that you might have, like I said, nobody plays perfectly. You might have a few bad interactions here or there, but if you show consistently that that people aren't having an issue with the way you're playing this way, it can start sort of that healing process. I don't think you'll ever get back to 100%, but I think that's also why we have those community standards. So that, like, okay, I screwed up. I've got 3 strikes. I blew strike number 1. I can be really sorry about that. But at the end of the day, if I screw up again, then it's going to be strike number 2. And so I think it needs to be a bit of a mix of both the community realizing, we live in glass houses, we shouldn't be too quick to beat people up, but also that there are objective standards that we hold people to, and especially people who want to be well known in this community.
I mean, to give like a non-40k example, this is your fault, Jim. She talks about soccer, most boring, the second most boring sport in the world after cricket.
I only watch it for the fake hits.
Yeah, but everyone, I'm assuming everybody knows who David Beckham is.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the biggest names of the past.
Posh Spice, Victoria.
Yeah, he's one of the biggest names of the past, 20, 30 years in football. Now, what people may not remember is in the 1998 World Cup, I think it was a semi-final. It was the quarterfinal semi-final. David Beckham basically did a very stupid thing and kicked an Argentinian player. The no ball nearby or anything. He just lost his temper, lashed out, and kicked this Argentinian. So he was sent off. A penalty was given, and Argentina scored, and England were out of the World Cup. And he was vilified for this by the press, by the public, by everybody. He was vilified. He lost his captaincy for Man United. All these things, absolutely vilified. But that was quite early in his career. We all know everyone knows David Beckham as this legendary football player who won all these trophies and all these things, and so he's obviously had to redeem himself. He's gone through redemption, obviously, in sport, showing that he's not going to lose his temper. He's not going to act like this petulant child anymore. But there will still be people that hold it against him. There will be those people that still remember that. The only reason I remember this is because I was at my girlfriend's house at the time, and her dad flipped out and started throwing I literally threw a bottle of milk, a glass, because in the UK, glass bottles of milk, threw a bottle of milk across the room into the wall. That's the only reason I remember this. He was a copper as well, so it's kind of scary. But there are people that still probably never forgive David Beckham for that, ever, ever, ever. And there will be people in our community that will never forgive TJ or whoever for what they did. But the majority of us are, sane people, rational people, adults, and we need to, let these people have a chance to show that they can change their ways. They can play the way that we should all be playing.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do that, then just let it go. Because they might let them improve. Who knows? Some person cheats, whatever, this or that. But who knows what they could achieve in the future? I don't just have a gaming achievement, but maybe they could, by their going to tournaments, inspire someone in some way that goes on. There's lots of things. It's not just winning that this event's about. I mean, we could talk. We've all. I mean, like also you talked about it during previous things. We've all had conversations. Nobody had conversations about something quite simply how much 40k in tournaments helps people's mental health and these kind of problems. And so just saying that someone's done something wrong, they're excluded forever, could actually remove that person from in the future helping somebody else. So let them redeem themselves. Let them prove they can, and if they do, then that should be enough.
And if they don't, if there is they do something wrong again, if they cheat again, then the next tier, I guess, of punishment needs to be proportional to that secondary cheating. But especially the first time, I think we have to be a lot more forgiving because and the sad part is that there's probably a lot of cheating that happens where people don't get caught, and I hope that people take out of this whole situation that it's not worth it for what I empathize for what TJ is going through. It's not, and again, I always like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and whether in his heart of hearts is intentional or not, I mean, we'll never know, but no one wants to go through that. And if you're a player that's listening to this podcast or any of the other million ones, just understand that it's not worth this pain. No amount of winning a no name RTT or GT in the middle of the pandemic is worth this level of like ostracization from the community. And I also think that our community as a whole needs to learn a lot from this lesson. Like as much as TJ needs to learn or the other cheaters need to learn, I think we need to learn a lot from this, which is how we deal with these kinds of situations. And that was, really why I wanted to talk about it, because I think that we always focus on the victim, but we don't focus on, how are we dealing with it and what are we doing and what do we take away from it? It's a lot about, it's very punitive focus. It's like about it's very pitchforks and tiki torches, when instead it should really be about, it is a reflection of us as a community, how we treat people when they make mistakes or they cheat or they do wrong, just like it's a reflection on how we treat people that commit crimes. Like how we treat our incarcerated is very reflective of the society that we live in. And in certain countries, there's way less empathy and way less effort put into rehabilitating them. They're thrown into jail and they're locked up and they're ostracized or they're kicked out of the community forever. And in a lot of more progressive places in the world, crime rate is down. The reoffense rate is down. So people that have committed that initial crime, their chance for them to reoffend is much lower. And it really comes down to how we treat them. And you can really make people bitter and angry and like frustrated with the community if we don't deal with it in a good way, right? Chris Powell, by the way, I'm not a softie. If I would ban you for life if I could. So don't get me wrong.
I'll tell you, if you don't let people redeem themselves, then there is zero reason to redeem yourself. If once you're labeled as a cheater, you're always be cheated. Everyone's going to say that, and then there's no path to redemption. Well, why do you bother stop cheating? There's no reason to stop cheating at that point. Okay, yeah, sure, you might get banned from events and stuff like that, but there'll always be people. You can always be places you can find to pay 40K. In this example, and if you don't allow people to redeem themselves and remove that shame, then why would they bother in the first place?
Right. Any final thoughts, guys? I know I had you guys for almost 2 hours, so I appreciate your time. Any kind of final thoughts on the subject here?
Just say I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think this conversation is going to be one it's imperfect in the sense that we can't solve all the problems, but it's good to be something that is regularly discussed, because this will happen again in the future, and then hopefully everyone, the TOs, and etc., will be able to learn from past experiences and make it better for everyone involved.
Yeah, and so I think that's just about it. So I wanted to, Sam and Neil, I wanted to thank you guys so much. Everyone that tuned in, thank you so much. If you guys enjoyed the show, make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on YouTube and Twitch. As I mentioned, tomorrow, 12 o'clock with the Competitive Corner with Winter's SEO. And then on Thursday, on the Best Overall Show, we actually have Matthew Aaron, who's a clinical psychologist, coming on. And he's going to discuss with us some of the performance issues that people that play at very high levels deal with. He works with a lot of the military and other kinds of companies, so he's going to really talk to us about like sport performance and imposter syndrome and just a lot of the kind of mental gymnastics and difficulties that players deal with when they compete at high levels, whether it's in real life or in sports. So tune in for those. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I appreciate it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. So have a great sunny, well, it's sunny here, so I don't know where you guys are, but it's sunny here in Vancouver. So have a nice sunny afternoon, and I'll see you guys